We're really excited to be able to have here Mr. Kucklick from Cannuflow to share about medical device innovations. And, without much further ado, I'll let him, I guess the only brief introduction is I actually heard of the book before I was able to meet him, and I am very thoroughly amazed about how practical it seems like when he brought down to an understanding level for a person like myself without that background. So without much further ado, I'd like to yield the podium to Mr. Kucklick.
Well, thank you, Dr. Choi. There we go. So over the next about 45 minutes, I'm going to talk about some things about innovation. So I'll get the slide to advance here. There we go. There's the correct button. So this is a few thoughts on innovation. And as Julie was saying, I'm the CEO of Cannuflow Incorporated. Cannuflow is a customer of Hantel and have been for a number of years. We make several of our product lines here, and it's been a very efficient and it's been a really great way for a company with a small headcount to be able to propagate a fairly broad product line, and also to be able to take that product line around the world, because we're selling in the United States and we're also selling in probably about 8 or 9 countries around the world. And without the support of a contract manufacturer with the depth of capability of Hantel, I don't think we'd be able to do it. And some of the other things I'm going to be talking about, you're going to see that having the ability to have these sorts of outsourcing capabilities I think is going to become even more important in the future. So anyway, so now for a shameless plug. And this is, Julia mentioned the Medical Device R&D Handbook, which is this book here. I would encourage you not to buy this book, and I'll tell you why. This particular book is the first edition. If you want to buy it as a collector's item, you're certainly welcome to do so, but the second edition is going to be coming out in September. The book is in production now, and it's going to have about double the amount of material of the original book. And I think that what I'm going to be the plan on the book, I think there's going to be a third edition, because the second edition is going to cover things like injection molding, how to raise money for a startup, a lot of other things, and then the third edition that I think will make it fairly complete is I want to get into things like metals and nitinol, investment casting, and that sort of thing for medical device. So anyway, so here's the Medical Device R&D Handbook. This book is actually, believe it or not, gotten up to number 20,000 on Amazon, which right here it's right up there with No Holds Barred Fighting and Ultimate X-Men, 2 other well-known biotechnology titles. Something I want to mention here is that if any of you have an expertise to share, because I know there's a lot of very smart people, and people smarter than I am in this room on a lot of subjects, that I would encourage everybody to write magazine articles. A lot of these trade magazines really need people with expertise and don't have a corporate axe to grind to write articles, things that are informative and unbiased. And also, I would encourage you to give talks like this also, because this is something where you learn as much doing this as the people listening to you, and also it gives you an opportunity to help encourage and bring along the next generation of people who are going to be doing this. So here we go. This is the Medtech innovation landscape as we see it today. And what do we have in it? We've got all this stuff. Tom Fogarty, the eminent medical device entrepreneur, said everything is in flux, including the status quo. And I think as of today, what I would add to this picture would be a shark coming out here and stinging jellyfish coming out of the wave. Because we just found out today that John Roberts, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, has followed in the footsteps of David Souter, and most of what we call the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare or whatever you want to call it has been upheld. That was a very unexpected development. The individual mandate was struck down but most of the rest of the law was upheld, which in the news, in the analysis going up to the ruling, everybody thought the whole thing was going to go. Then in the analysis before the ruling, they said probably the worst possible or the most disruptive outcome would be that the individual mandate which funds the whole thing is struck down and the rest of it is allowed to stay. So we have probably the most disruptive outcome possible. So that's what I said. I would put a shark or two coming from here, biting off the end of the guy's surfboard, and a bunch of jellyfish in there too. So anyway, this is what we're dealing with today. However, when you have difficult problems, then it gives the opportunity for smart people to come up with innovative solutions. One of the things about innovation is, in this situation, that a lot of solutions are not going to be gadget solutions. They're going because there's a lot of things that we're dealing with that are problems that are not really technological in origin. So everybody wants to innovate, or people talk about it, but relatively few people really do it. Really, why do people get talked out of innovating? First of all, well, it won't work. Like, you have an idea, and people get talked out of it because they just don't think it'll work. So next is people want people to approve of them, but if you come up with some tinfoil hat idea, people will laugh at me. The other thing is that people don't think they have the abilities. That especially in the medical device arena, one of the concerns you have is that you look at how much there is to know and how much there is to solve and how daunting some of the problems are and how complex they are, and sometimes you just think, how can little old me come up with a solution to some of these problems? But the thing is that all throughout history, it's been little old yous that have come up with solutions to these problems, because that's the only people there are to come up with them. Then I'll get fired. If you work in a company, and I'll leave the name of the company out of it, but there was a person that I know that was working at a company, and he came up with an improved endoscopy camera. And what happened is he showed it to his boss, because his boss had him working on a couple of very specific things. The boss looks at the camera and throws it against the wall, and it says, "I told you not to work on that. Now get back to what I told you to work on." So that is not an environment that is exactly friendly to innovation. So that's why some people don't want to stick their neck out and innovate. And especially because in bigger corporations, that innovation is not seen as a benefit, as equals cost plus risk. So the next thing about innovation is this is an etching by Albrecht Dürer, and this is that happy people don't innovate. That in the world that we live in today, unhappiness is seen as a pathological condition that needs to be cured. But the thing is that innovators, unless you're unhappy enough about something, you're not going to want to change it. And this is one of the paradoxes of innovation. And one of the well-worn quotes that you've heard is that, that there's a great quote by Thomas Edison, and it's that restlessness and discontent are the first necessities of progress. And show me a thoroughly satisfied man, and I'll show you a failure. And the thing is that this is a paradox of innovation. We solve problems to make other people happier, but we have to be unhappy enough about the problem to want to solve it. And Ralph Waldo Emerson describes this state of wanting to change things as divine discontent. It's a lot different than and also Steve Jobs was somebody that was well known for being at war with things that sucked. And one of the, an example that I want to bring to your attention would be if you ever go to Washington, D.C., and you go to the Natural History Museum on the Mall, you will see the Ken Behring wing of the Natural History Museum, and also he also helped to fund I think it's the Museum of the American History Museum that's on the Mall that just opened. And he's the single biggest benefactor at about $500 million to the Smithsonian. He's also the developer of Black Hawk in Contra Costa County. But he started out as a poor guy. He did very, very well for himself. Also, if you go to, I think it's up in Danville, there's the Black Hawk Museum, which is the car museum. And that has, a lot of that is his personal car collection. But he had, I heard him give a talk one time. And this is about, like, happy people don't innovate. And he was also once on the Forbes 400 list of richest Americans, but he said, and he describes it like this, he says, what affects me? What breaks my heart when I see it? What strikes a nerve? Then follow that to a course of action. Once you act, you will have a sense of purpose and satisfaction that you've never felt before, beyond money, beyond duty, and beyond recognition. And he says, my greatest regret is it took me most of my life to figure this out. So the thing is, though, is that we innovate for other people. And the thing is, though, what do people want anyway? So here's somebody that wants something. I was in Berlin, Germany, and I was enjoying the museums there, and while I was doing that, some students from Humboldt University were out there protesting about something, I think, but I thought this is a really honest sign, because what does this person want? He wants more stuff. But what does he really want? We're all familiar, many of us are familiar with the quote from Justice Potter Stewart when he describes obscenity. He says, I can't describe it, but I know it when I see it. And the other well-worn anecdote about innovation is from Henry Ford. He said, if I would have asked people what they wanted, they wouldn't have asked for a car because they didn't know what a car was. They would have asked for a faster horse that ate less oats. So discovering what people need that they don't know they need and now can't live without, that is a key skill of the innovator. And that's what makes real innovation so difficult to achieve, because the most important needs that people have are latent needs, ones that they can't articulate, and ones that you as the innovator need to draw out of them. The other thing about what the people want is that many times innovators tend to be technologically focused, and they tend not to pay as much attention to the customer. But if you think about that, if an engineer were to try to violate the laws of physics to make a product, we'd say the engineer is an idiot. But if a designer designs a product that violates the laws of human nature, we assume the user is an idiot. So there is later on in the presentation, I'll have a mention of a company that has achieved tremendous success by having what they call zero distance customer focus. So to go along with the current events of today, this was an opinion piece in the New York Times by Ezekiel Emanuel, brother of Rahm Emanuel, Obama's former chief of staff. And this is where he says that the intuitive surgical Da Vinci robot is fake innovation because it costs too much. I kind of wonder if he thinks the iPhone is just a fake innovation over a rotary phone. So this is one of the problems, though. This is one of the key challenges of innovation right now, is how to bring innovation to people at a cost that they can afford, and a cost and at a price that the healthcare system can afford. One of the problems, though, is with innovation is that when you start to put the focus on cost containment, then the emphasis shifts to cost and not value. And I heard a great quote one time that cutting costs is what you do when you don't know how to add value. And one of the problems that we're running into is that you can cut costs so far and drive profit out of things to where right now common drugs like Taxol, doxorubicin, and fentanyl, the commonly used anesthetic, are becoming in short supply because nobody wants to make them because there's no money in it. The thing about innovation is that most people think of innovation in terms of technology. However, Peter Drucker, my favorite definition of innovation is from him, and it is, innovation is not invention. Innovation is a term of economics rather than technology, and innovation can be defined as the task of endowing human and material resources with new and greater wealth-producing capacity. You can find that in the book The Essential Drucker. But the test of an innovation is whether it is economically successful. And that's what separates an innovation from a technological novelty. The thing about innovation, again, is like a lot of people use the word innovation. Campbell Soup and Procter & Gamble in their annual report use the word innovation an average of about 20 times. So this was from the Wall Street Journal and talks about how many times the word innovation is used. And if we had as much innovation as there was the use of the word innovation, we'd be able to drive a smart car to the moon by now or something. But one of the things, another phrase for innovation that I've heard recently is from Omar Ishrak, from the new CEO of Medtronic, and this is reverse innovation. That one of the places that bigger companies are going for growth now, because they see the United States market, especially with recent changes, as fairly saturated, and then the European market is fairly saturated. For instance, like the orthopedic companies like Stryker, they sell to the stockholders the story, we can get double-digit growth year after year, every year. And so that's not going to happen in the United States and in Western Europe. There are places that's going to happen in the BRIC countries, especially in Brazil and China. That's where you're going to see. That's where a lot of the bigger companies are looking for growth right now. However, and also in India, Omar Ishrak talks about reverse innovation, giving a 50% solution at 15% of the cost, like taking something that people already know well and repackaging it so that it solves a problem. I don't remember the name of the guy, but there was somebody that wrote a book called The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid. So this is some of the areas that that people are looking into to drive innovation. So now, the thing about innovation is that if you think about the Peter Drucker economic utility test, that economics matter a great deal. The economic environment that you have to generate innovation is tremendously important. And so there is a economic system that is the worst of all systems, but it's, as Winston Churchill said, it's better than all the rest, which is capitalism. And we have to believe that brain power is randomly and evenly distributed across the human population. But why do some countries objectively excel at innovation and others don't? And one of the explanations is that if you have an economic system that rewards individual contribution and individual achievement, then innovation will be incentivized. And where that does not exist, innovation will not be incentivized. And there's a great book called The Victory of Reason by Rodney Stark, and he describes how religious moral principles and capitalism were the foundations for the success of the West, and how the West became the incubator for innovation around the world. But now that these ideas have been exported around the world, you see them taking root in many other places. And so those of us who live in, say, the United States are in a global competition. And one of the I remember seeing my mother-in-law, my father-in-law went to Yale, and so my mother-in-law would get the Yale magazine. And one of the things they talked about in there is that the major universities in the United States, if you are a U.S. citizen that you want to get into one of the Ivy League schools, they make no secret that you are not in competition with all the smart kids in the U.S. You're in competition with the smart kids from all over the world, because that is what they see their recruiting pool as. So this is something that's this is another thing that the globalization of business and the globalization of competition is something that's becoming tremendously important. The other thing about innovation is that human beings are unique in that we have the capability of reason, at least most people. And the other thing that's unique about human beings is that human beings have the ability to visualize the future and imagine the future. This is something that is a key skill for the innovator. In Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, which is a very popular business title, he talks about Wayne Gretzky, the hockey player, and how Wayne Gretzky was successful because he could see where the puck was going to be, not where it was. And so here's I don't know how many, I'm in the East Bay, so I don't know how many Raiders fans I have here, but this is when the Raiders and the 49ers played. But you can see, here is the quarterback throwing the ball, and here is the receiver going to where the ball is going to be. So this is something, the key skill of the innovator is to be able to see things that other people don't see and get there before they get there. The other thing is that whatever we think the future is going to be, it's going to turn out to be something different. We can imagine it as much as we can, and a lot of people do. And so here is a kind of a paleo future imagination of the future. So, I mean, how many of us here who are like under the age of 40 have actually even seen or used some of these manual drafting tools? And then the other thing is, this is the imagining what life will be in the far distant future of like 1995, which was like 20 years ago. So, and now we use CAD software that wasn't even thought of then, and I'm sure that this budding nerd, that the carbon footprint of his rocket ship never entered into his mind. So, ideas not acted upon are worthless. This is a quote that I heard from Dr. Tom Fogarty. So, but what does it take to make an idea come to pass? So it takes research, it takes R, and it takes a little friend D. So we got R and D. Now, what you notice about this is that you've got big R and small d. And this is the eager little D guy, he makes the stuff that the big brainy R guy thinks of. And so what happens is the process goes along, and as you build a product and you want to be able to sell things, what you want to do is to get the two of them to play well together. And this is kind of the ideal situation where R comes up with stuff and D develops stuff, and then you give it to marketing and they sell stuff, and then you've got a happy situation. And then what happens is you get to a point where you're fairly successful, and then D grows up. So D takes over, R gets frustrated and goes looking for something else to do. Then what happens is then disruptive innovation comes along, and then the bean counters wonder what happened. So one of the books, one of the well-known books on, or set of books on innovation is by Clayton Christensen, who wrote The Innovator's Dilemma, Innovator's Solution, but he's the one that popularized the term disruptive innovation. And when people use that term, disruptive innovation, a lot of people don't actually know what that means. They think it's a big technological breakthrough. But one of the thing that Clayton Christensen describes about disruptive innovation is that disruptive innovation, he says, starts at the bottom of the market and works its way up. And he gives the example of Nucor Steel. Nucor Steel was a company that was making nuclear fuel rods for before 3 Mile Island. And then we all know, those of us old enough to remember 3 Mile Island know that that was what put the entire nuclear industry in the total hibernation for a number of decades. So here was a company now, and they said, okay, we can't make these fuel rods because there's no market for them now. What do we know how to do? So, well, we know how to melt scrap steel, and we know how to do it efficiently and cheap. So what did they do? What they did they said, okay, what can we sell with steel that's made this way? Well, we can sell rebar. And so the bigger companies looked at this little Nucor Steel with their little mini mill, and they said, well, what are you guys doing? So we're making rebar. That's the cheap, crappy, no-profit steel that we don't want to sell. We don't care. And so, but you guys will never figure out how to make structural steel. So next thing you know, Nucor is making I-beams and structural steel for buildings. And then the U.S. Steels, the Bethlehem Steels are sitting up there in their offices, and they say, well, but we know how to make the bright rolled steel that the appliance manufacturers and the automobile companies use, and you will never be able to learn how to make that out of scrap steel. Next thing you know, that's what they're doing, and they're doing it at a lower cost than the vertically integrated big companies can do, and now the big companies have nowhere else to go. But that's an example of how disruptive innovation comes from the bottom of the market and works its way up, and that's how it escapes the notice of the bigger incumbent players. So this is something we're always told to do. We're always told to think outside the box. One of the things about phrases like this is that I think they start to substitute for actual thinking. And I think there ought to be a swear jar for every time somebody who's in the innovation business uses this word. So the other thing about innovation and disruptive innovation, and I just described the story of Clayton Christensen, is that innovation is often born ugly. So the other thing is, like, what is disruptive innovation really? And I described how Clayton Christensen said that it's works from the bottom of the market. But the other thing about disruptive innovation is that it disrupts business models. This is an example of what we're dealing with now, is how Amazon has disrupted the book selling business. And you think about, like, when all of our flash drives have been erased by cosmic rays, and the cloud where all of our information lives evaporates, what is the little green man going to be able to come and read except for the books that were put out of business by the Kindle? And then this is the other thing about the way to look at disruptive innovation is also with business models. That if you think that YouTube is all it is just for showing cat videos, the real business that they're after is to control video distribution. So this was the other slide I was talking about, innovation being born ugly. I got this phrase from Lonnie Smith, the former CEO of Intuitive Surgical. This was at a Stanford Innovators Workbench talk. And he gave the example of how Intuitive Surgical started out by making a robot using technology that came from SRI or Stanford Research. And the idea was that instead of taking the chest and cracking it open this way, that you could take the chest, crack it open, and lift it like this, and then reach into the chest wall with a robot and be able to do a bypass of the left internal mammary artery. That was the original idea behind the Intuitive Surgical robot. So they built a successful robot that did that job, and the adoption was just minimal. There was very little market penetration. So now they have this tremendous robot that really worked. It was a great piece of equipment, but nobody wanted to use it until there was a urologist in Canada that had one of these Intuitive Surgical robots installed there, and it was supposed to be used for bypass, and this urologist was looking at it, and I said, I could use that thing to take out prostates. And so what he did is he took this thing, and his first operation took probably like 8 or 10 hours. It was a very long operation, but it was very successful. So now most of the Intuitive Surgical robots, almost none of them are being used for bypass surgery. Almost all of them are used for minimally invasive prostate resections and hysterectomies. So innovation is often born ugly. And so here's a cartoon that shows that. And those of you online, it says, I can't say I'm entirely pleased with my hip replacement. So the other thing about innovation is that if you've got a lot of smart people looking at the same problem, they're going to start to converge on a solution if there's a solution to be had. And a great example of this is Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. And other examples of this are Alexander Graham Bell, Elisha Gray, and any of those. And those of you who've had math probably know how calculus was developed almost in parallel by Leibniz and Newton. And so here is an example of Thomas Edison, who was a very practical. He would grind through every permutation of a solution and use the brute force method until he got to a solution. He was also a very good promoter and a great communicator. Nikola Tesla was somebody who would work from theory and work from calculation and would come up with solutions that way. So two different ways of working. And they came up with, and they were both working on the same problem. And the one that made the money was Edison. And unfortunately, Tesla didn't, even though the system of electricity that we use today is the one that Tesla really developed, which is alternating current. The other thing about Edison is that he's an example of how you can hold very stubbornly onto a solution once you find it. And Edison, as we know, like he came up with the record player, but if you go to an antique store, you see these cylindrical Edison records. And what happened is Edison held on to making those for many years after the platter style of record was very popular, and those were falling out of favor, but he kept making them because he would just hold on to things like that. And the thing about innovation, this was something Tom Fogarty told me one time, is that success is like getting your leg caught in a trap, and that you have to be willing to chew your leg off to be able to get out of the trap to move on to the next thing. And so this is some things about how that if you're working on something, that if you're like that, kind of like that receiver that's going after the ball, you better run fast and get there first. Otherwise that invention is going to get picked off by somebody else. Here is a case study. This is Haier Corporation. I had the opportunity to go to China last year, and this is an interesting case study in innovation. So in 1984, this is the they were the Qingdao State Air Conditioner Company. And they were almost bankrupt, and they made junk. Zhang Rumin was brought in to do a turnaround. So what happened is they had a customer that brought back a bad refrigerator. And so they had about 300 of them in the warehouse, and they said, well, we'll get you a good one. At the time, a refrigerator cost almost a year's wages. So they found that 25% of the refrigerators in the warehouse were bad. So Zhang Rumin had these refrigerators lined up on the factory floor, and he handed out sledgehammers. And he says, we're going to destroy these. And everybody got very wide-eyed because these things were very valuable to these people. And they said, no, this is not punishment. We are not going to make products like this anymore. And from this day forward. And so this is kind of like we're going to burn the bridge, and we're going to move forward from here. So what they did is they said, okay, we don't know how to make quality stuff, so how do we do this? Qingdao used to be a German colony, and so they made a joint venture with Liebherr Corporation, and that's where and if you wonder why a Chinese company has a very un-Chinese sounding name, that's where the name came from. The joint venture was the Libo Haier Corporation, which was the transliteration of Liebherr into Chinese. So now, they also did something that they focused on the customer very intensely. And they had what they call zero-distance customer focus. They said, okay, the customer is going to tell us what they want. And it's our job to understand what they want and give them a quality product of what they want. Then they went around the world to learn and use any best practices from all over the world, and they banned the not-invented here syndrome. And the other thing is that they said we are not going to compete on price. So now, in 2010, Haier Corporation is the second largest maker of white goods in the world. Is there any such thing as creativity? If the definition of creativity is to make something from nothing, the answer is no unless your name is God. And even in the book of Genesis, there are only 3 acts of creation. So literal creation is actually a very rare thing. Austin Kleon has a little book online called Steal Like an Artist. And he says, you know, everybody's going to borrow from somewhere, so if you can do it in a good way or you can do it in a bad way, but you still have to borrow. So the trick is to, if you're going to borrow, do it the right way. So the other thing about innovation is there's a lot of prior art out there. In the room that we're here at Hantel, there is a wall with probably about 24 patents. And as I say, like I said with the book previously, that there's a lot of things that have been done before. But let me show you a couple of things. I really like museums, and I especially like museums. My daughter works at one. If you ever go down to Laguna Beach, there's the Laguna Beach Museum of Art, and my daughter is the events director there. So make sure you patronize the Laguna Beach Museum of Art when you go down there. So anyway, prior art. Take a look at this arrowhead, and you'll see a couple of things about it. It looks very much like a trocar that you could buy from Ethicon. And look at the bevels on there. Look at the cutting edges, and look at how the thing is cast. Now take a look at these spring pins. Look at the wire forming, the spring pins, and so on, and just think about that. A lot of what we do with medical devices, like with guide wires and things, use a lot of this basic thinking. Take a look at this bucket. Look at how the metal forming, how the ribbing in to save weight. This looks like something that comes from Restoration Hardware. Look at the Morse taper in there. This is the same type of a valve system that we use today. This is a thing called a Berlin Gold hat. This is actually a lookup table that gives you where you are in the 39-year cycle between the lunar and the solar year. Now, and take a look at all this stuff, and it says, wow, this looks like some pretty modern thinking. When was this stuff done? A very long time ago, in the early and late Bronze Age. So just when you think you've come up with something really new, maybe there really is nothing new under the sun. So but there's a lot to look at and a lot to learn from. And here's something great to learn from. This is the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. Barcelona is a wonderful place to go, and this is a wonderful thing to see if you go there. And take a look at the columns and look how they branch up, and look at the shape of the arches. There's some very unique things about this, because Gaudí, first of all, he worked with parabolic and hyperbolic surfaces, which we know them very well today in our CAD programs. This was very revolutionary at the time he did it. He also studied natural forms because he's a deeply religious man, and he believed that God's creation would show him what he needed to know. Today we call this biomimicry. The other thing, again, I said, when you look at those arches, one of the things that he managed to do in stone was to build a space that had a lot of interior space, and you have these branching forms. This almost looks like the trabecula in the heart, but it's supposed to look like a stone forest. And then you look at the shape of the arches. He was able to do all this without relying on the flying buttresses of the Gothic cathedrals and get a lot of interior space with a minimum amount of stone. But how did he do it? What he did is he took the problem and he turned it upside down. Are any of you familiar with how this was done and how Gaudí did this? You're in for a treat. He took the weights that he had to support, and then he took and hung them from strings. And he built this structure upside down. And then the catenary arches of the strings told him what the arches should be to hold up the most weight with the least amount of stone. Now that's what you call real innovation. So finally, I'll finish up here. What's the secret to innovation? And this is part 1, 2, and 3. I'll go through these quickly. First of all is develop expertise. I spoke one time with Paul Yock at Stanford University, and he said, I asked him, what is the biggest mistake that people make getting into this field? And he said, well, that there's so much to learn. He said, people try to spread themselves too thin. He said, you have to have at least one thing that you're a real deep expert in. You can learn a lot about a lot of things, but you have to have that taproot of a real disciplined expertise in at least one field. The other is observe. A great story about observation is Josh Mackauer, that he, first of all, he observed, and he also, but he saw that he had a problem with the sinuses, and he observed that the sinuses looked almost like blood vessels, and so he figured out a way to clear up his sinus problem, and that'll be on the next item here. But one thing I wanted to read you just briefly out of the Medical Device R&D Handbook here is a great quote. This is by Michael Faraday, one of the people that developed the foundations of the rules and the laws of electronics. And he said, for what study is there more fitted to the mind of man than the physical sciences? And what is there more capable of giving him an insight into the actions of those laws, a knowledge which gives interest to the most trifling phenomenon of nature, and makes the student find tongues in trees, books in the running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything. So this is the key to innovation, is observe, and then become an expert in finding needs. As I said, Josh Mackauer observed that the sinuses had convolutions in them much like blood vessels. But what he did is he took a well-known angioplasty balloon and stuck it up and learned how to stick it up people's noses and clear up their sinus blockages with it. This was something and it was because he focused in on what people needed. And do you know what that was worth? We all know that was worth about $700 million when he sold that to Johnson & Johnson. So now, the real secret to innovation part 2, prototype, test, prototype some more. And I picked up this card here from Hantel, and this shows the Wright brothers airplane. And this is the value of prototyping. Why did the Wright brothers get off the ground before everybody else? It's because what they did is they built their own wind tunnel. And what they found out is that everybody who was trying to build an airplane, from Langley to Chanute, everybody else, they found that the basic data that Octave Chanute had come up with was wrong. No, that's mine. That's tell me that my 45 minutes is about up here. So anyway, but they found out that the basic data that Octave Chanute had come up with was wrong because they tested it in their own wind tunnel. They came up with an airfoil that actually lifted the way it was supposed to, and that's why they got off the ground first, even though there were other people competing with them that were much better funded and had a lot more resources. And finally, the secret of innovation part 3, take action, follow up, and follow up to the follow-up. So this is the end of the talk, and so there's no problems. There's just undiscovered solutions. And that's what I had to talk about today.
Thank you, Mr. Kucklick, for that really wonderful talk about innovation. And for the people online, please enter your questions into the chat area, and we'll relay that to the speaker. But for the people currently in the room, we'll be happy to take some questions here for Mr.
Yes.
Well, I just have a comment on your opening talk about the Supreme Court ruling this morning.
Yes.
Sometimes these government actions cause trajectories that no one knows which direction it's going to go. And these are times of opportunity. In 1960, I worked for a company called Medtronic in Minneapolis. It's a rod shop operation, North Minneapolis. 15 of us were there. And it was a great environment. You know, it kind of reminded me here, only it was smaller. And my job, I was a student at the University of Minnesota, but this is a summer job. It's kind of like the intern job.
This sounds, you come over here.
Yeah.
This sounds really interesting. I want you to, well, get up here so everybody can see you and hear you.
All right. Anyway, this is sometimes age is worthwhile. And sometimes we shouldn't get too concerned about what happens with government action because there's a lot of smart people who work with the government, including us. We all work with the government one way or the other. We pay taxes, right? Or some of us do. Anyway, so the founder of Medtronic and at that time CEO, Earl Bakken, asked me what I was planning on doing after I left the University of Minnesota. And at Medtronic, I had great experience. One day I'd work on this thing called a pacemaker. It was external. We had controls for how fast you wanted to go and how much the amplitude was and that kind of thing. And then I'd go into the kitchen and pot them in a big potting thing for a while. And then I'd go out to the garage and test them on a walleye pipe scale with we had leads that go to the heart, and these are made from piano wire, and I put a weight on them, and if they did break, we'd ship them off to the University of Minnesota, and they would sterilize them and put them in the patient the next day. Easy, no regulations, no nothing. And Bakken said to me, he said, well, what are you going to do when you get to California? And I said, well, there's a space program coming along, and I've been offered an opportunity to make signal conditions for astronauts, the little things that they kind of wear when they go to the moon. It's going to test, check their EKG and temperature and all that kind of stuff. It sounds really cool, and this sounds like a really great experience for me. He says, that's government. The government, they regulate that stuff. He said, it's highly regulated, that space stuff. I mean, you'll have these guys on your back, and they'll be watching everything you do, and what a pain that's going to be. Well, anyway, I did go out, and I had great fun out here, and I really enjoyed it. I got to watch astronauts and take off and measure their bioparameters and all that good stuff. But I ran into Earl Bakken at a medical meeting a few years later, and he says, they're starting to come on our necks now. We're going to have to start regulating. We're going to have to watch this, that, and the other. I don't know how we're going to do it. There's one thing about engineers, as Earl was, is that you always think worst case conditions. You design for worst case. This is just the way you're taught. It drives my wife bats when I look at always the worst case. She says, Anyway, worst case condition was the government's going to completely screw everything up. And maybe those regulations are all right. I said, I don't know, we'll see what we can do. Well, then, sometime later, it's getting in the early 60s, and Johnson was in, and he was talking about this thing called Medicare. So I see Earl Bakken again at a medical meeting, and I said, well, what do you think about Medicare? He says, Medicare, man, that's going to kill us. He says, we're going to be dead with Medicare. It's going to be, they're going to be all over us, and I don't know how we're going to do it. Well, at that point, I sold my stock in Medtronic. Okay, and bought an Austin Healey, or their Boston at that time. The Austin Healey would be worth about $50 million now had I, kept my stock. But anyway, what made it go was Medicare. Medicare just caused that company to take off and to where it is now, $5 billion a year in sales, something like that. So I think it grosses around $5 billion. When I was there, our gross income for the entire year, including our savings account, was under $100,000. And we thought we had saturated the market. We thought, who else was going to be able to afford a pacemaker? Because I think they were like $300 a piece or something like that back then. And the market was just too small. So look at today as opportunity. And I think we don't know, but if you look at it the right way, very intelligently, I think you'll all do well. Anyway, that's my comment. Some experience.
That was a great comment.
Are there further questions in the room, or I don't know if there are any online?
So at what point have you decided that you have to do something on your own? And something must have triggered at one point that allow us to do my own product.
I think I was raised that way. I grew up. My father had a furniture store, and I grew up. And my first job at age 11 was sweeping out the warehouse. And my dad said, "Well, I'll double your age and pay you this." So I made 22 cents an hour sweeping out the warehouse when I was 11 years old. So I grew up in a furniture store, delivering furniture, fixing furniture, in that whole environment. And my father, he started that furniture store because he used to work, he wanted to get into aviation because he was an airplane nut. And he got himself into what is now the Glenn Research Center. It used to be Lewis Research Center in Cleveland, Ohio. And he found that he just constitutionally he was not, wasn't cut out for that sort of an environment. He wanted to do something on his own. And so he started up an appliance store until his brother set up a competitive one across the railroad tracks in downtown Olmsted Falls, Ohio. And so he switched over to early American furniture. So that's how I grew up. So I grew up in this entrepreneurial environment. And then I came to move to Silicon Valley, which is where the dream here is like everybody wants to do something on their own. Everybody wants to have their own individual contribution and be able to like start and run their own company. I don't know where they got those crazy ideas, but there's a self-selecting group of people here that do that. So, but being able to work on a project and be able to do it start to finish and be able to conceptualize the product and not just hand it off to somebody, but conceptualize it, refine it, figure out how to make it, then figure out how to sell it, and then figure out how to make more of them, and then figure out how to make it at a price that people are willing to pay and you can actually make money at it. I think that's something that is a challenge that a lot of people that are in Silicon Valley, they enjoy that challenge.
Yeah, actually, off of that question, I don't know. So your point is actually, your point is that maybe it's less. It's more the mindset and of this group of people rather than say the geography per se. I guess I've heard that as an argument. That's why Silicon Valley, there's all this innovation coming out from this. Why it's not so fruitful in say other areas.
There is an interesting thing that made Silicon Valley happen, and it's a quirk in California employment law. And I'm trying to remember what section of the employment law it is, but in just about every other state, if you work for a company and you leave to go to work for another company in a competitive business, you cannot work for a competitor. And Silicon Valley got started because you had Fairchild Semiconductor, and then you had Andy Grove and Bob Noyce and what they called the traitorous eight. And what they did is they were unhappy with what was being done at Fairchild. Then they left and started Intel. In just about any other state in the United States, they would not have been able to do that. They would have been sued out of existence by their former employer. But in California, we have this little carve-out or quirk in our employment law that you cannot be prevented from making a living. And so that's how somebody like Steve Jobs and like Jobs and Wozniak can work for HP and still build a computer in their garage, and how the first group of the founders of Intel could leave Fairchild and be able to start a company like that. And I think that, and then also in Silicon Valley, you've got, for instance, Guidant, which used to be Advanced Cardiovascular Systems, is one of the things that really started off the whole medical device business here, because I think there's about 60 or 70% of all VC money that goes into medical device comes to California, and about 2/3 of that comes to the Bay Area. And then the other places are Minnesota and Boston. Though I was just recently in Northern Ohio, that Northern Ohio is starting to develop an interesting little ecosystem there too, because now the biggest employer now in Northern Ohio, it used to be the automobile assembly plants. Now it's Cleveland Clinic. They are the largest employer now in Northern Ohio. What's starting to happen in Akron, Ohio, is because now you've got a lot of research stuff being done at Cleveland Clinic, and also they've got a big competitor, University Hospitals, that's connected with Case University or Case Western Reserve University. You've got a very active environment there, and then what's starting to happen, and then you've got Akron, Ohio, that is one of the pioneering areas in polymer chemistry because of the tire and rubber industry, which has now gone overseas. But now you've got a lot of polymer chemists that are starting to do things with medical device polymers, and the company that, there's a company that rolled up GLS and a number of other medical polymer makers, and now they're called Poly One, and they're based now in Avon Lake, Ohio, just off the west side of Cleveland. And so you've got another kind of interesting little a little ecosystem starting up there. So, but Silicon Valley is something that because you have a self-selecting group of people that move here because they want to be innovative. You've got the infrastructure legally because there's legal infrastructure to support innovation. And also you've got, this is where kind of like where real venture capital started. And those three ingredients together make up and that's why, for instance, like Facebook didn't stay in Boston. That's why they moved here. So that's a little bit of the reasons why Silicon Valley is Silicon Valley.
I don't know if anyone else has any questions, but I had one final question for you.
Yes.
So let you go. So what, in your view, is the biggest next area for medical device innovation that you see? Like, if there's any, since you mentioned that being able to see the future, I mean, it'd be great to hear.
I think just in general, the biggest area of innovation is if you think about this thing here, this iPhone, this is really a miniature computer. This is a more powerful computer for a few $100s, even if you have to pay full price for it. Then, because I remember the first computer I had was an IBM PC XT that was I think 16 megahertz and had a whopping 40 megabyte hard drive, and it had two megs of RAM. And that computer in 1988, about 87, 88, was about $2,000. And you think that this thing is far more capable than that, and it fits in your pocket, and it has infinitely more memory. And so you have Moore's Law, which the whole Moore's Law idea, where you can get more, you have like double the capability for half the price on some timeline. One of the challenges in Medtech is, I just heard I'm trying to remember the name of the rule or the law, but it's almost like Moore's Law in reverse. That the more money that they seem to spend in pharma to develop a drug, it's like you get half the results for twice the price as time goes on. So that's one of the biggest challenges is to get to this kind of performance where you can get more and more capability for a lower and lower price. And if you do that, what's going to happen is the resistance to that is, well, we can't make any money doing that. But the reality is if you can make things cheap enough and capable enough, more people will use them, and you'll get a bigger market.
Right. I guess I'll give a hand of applause for Brenda. If you have any questions about that we wanted to pass on to the speaker, you can email at webinar@hanteltech.com. Otherwise, please let us know about future topics, and if you're even interested in speaking. I mean, I missed your name, but if you'd like to be interested in giving a talk in the future, I mean, please let us know. So, thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me.